Okay. Okay. So what we are going to do today is to talk about strategy, right? Last weeks we were in the last 2 weeks we were talking about what are the challenges of our times and how is it so difficult to address these challenges. And last week, the last 2 weeks, we were working on the question: so how can new innovative ideas look like to address these problems and issues, and how to generate new ideas. So today the focus will be on how can we now realize or develop realizations, business models, strategy in order to really bring these innovative solutions, these innovative ideas into life. But before we start really with giving you some inputs on business models and on strategy, we would really first like to go and to hear from your side. What do you associate with the term social entrepreneur and social enterprise? So a concept that has emerged within the last few decades in the context of achieving or addressing grand societal challenge was the concept of social entrepreneurship. So and before telling you too much about it, you have probably heard about it. You have probably heard about social business, social enterprises, and for us it would be great to hear what are the ideas that come into your mind when you hear these terms. So you can go to menti.com again, a tool that we have already tested with Gita and used with Gita, and enter the code 5082577, and then just throw in some ideas. Just write up some basic terms that come to your mind, but you can of course also say something, right? So we are here in the same room. If you want to have read already papers or articles around social entrepreneurs, or have questions because you are not so sure what the concept means but have some ideas, it would be great if you shared these. Perhaps some of you has already some experiences with social enterprises. That would be great if you could share these as well. Okay, so here we have already some first ideas. It's social entrepreneurship or social enterprises are about values, about impact, about local impact in particular. It's about change makers, finding solutions, innovation, non-profit. It's often non-profit, or this is actually an interesting one of the basic questions. Can social enterprises make profit, and to what extent is it possible to combine profit orientation with impact orientation? Here you say that it's not a strict profit focus, but rather purpose-oriented enterprises, not financially motivated or not only profit-oriented. Visionary ideas, creating societal values surely is an aspect of social entrepreneurship. Care about the employees. Does anybody know social enterprises he has encountered that he or she would like to present shortly?
We have Veronica who raised her hand.
Thank you, Georgie.
Okay, I don't actually have a social enterprise in mind, but I was just going to say it's a social enterprise compared to sort of typical business model would talk about helping people. It's more humanitarian based, and like looking at problems, and yeah, not just working for profit, but also not just working not for profit, somewhere in between.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, this idea of somewhere in between, between non-profit and for-profit orientation. On the one hand, social enterprises typically seek to be sustainable also in an economic sense, right? So to generate income in a way that they can pay their employees, cover all their costs, but generating profit. Beyond this covering costs, there is a question how much profit can be made with social enterprises, and the focus typically is on generating impact. But there are, which we will, as we will see later, different types of social enterprises. So there is a large variety and diversity. But very basically speaking, combining ideas of for-profit organizations, business firms, and non-profit organizations is what characterizes social enterprises. So you have, I think, covered many ideas. Georgie.
We also had Roman who had raised his hand.
Yes, I think the browser Ecosia is a social enterprise, and they are planting trees for, I think, every 10,000 search requests they make, and they're a so-called purpose enterprise, so they're dedicated towards a societal purpose of, in that case, improving the environmental situation. And I think they have no shareholders or something, so the society is the owner of the enterprise.
Ecosia is surely a great example of a social enterprise. They are an interesting alternative to Google, so they're a search engine, right? Provide a search engine, and for each search or for a certain number of searches, they plant trees, and they have already, I don't know how many million, but planted quite many trees. In those areas where they plant trees, they also work with local initiatives and support these initiatives to support people living there. And they have also a responsible structure and processes in terms of how to deal with employees and who is the owner of the organization. They adopted a model that is called steward ownership. So the founders of this organization consider themselves as stewards of this organization. So they do not seek to sell the organization at some time, but have made sure or want to make sure that the organization, the firm, exists even when they have to quit or when they leave the organization. So employees are also valued and supported in the case of Ecosia very much. Great example, yes. Other ideas or comments? Okay, so let's get back. Thanks for the participation.
There are some more. Maybe we can actually draw on those two.
Sorry, stop sharing for a second.
No, don't worry. I can do that. So there was, I think, Mara. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. There is also a social enterprise which is called Social B, and they're connecting refugees or people that migrated to Germany with companies who are looking for employees, maybe also specialized employees, and they're making social impact by helping refugees or migrated people to find work. And also, I think all the profits that they make are reinvested in the business, so that they, also kind of non-profit in a traditional way, but it all goes back into the business so that they can grow.
I think that's an aspect of many social enterprises, that they do not seek to take out much of the value that is created, of the economic value, in order to give the money back to investors, but to mainly reinvest the money that they earn in order to grow or to mostly scale their impact, to have a larger impact, but to address more people, to develop new offerings. This is something that characterizes many social enterprises as well.
There was also Simon who had a cool idea about Magda's Hotel. Maybe you want to tell us about that. Simon, are you there? Maybe he dropped out.
I'm
Simon,
sorry.
He's back.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I got to know Magda's Hotel. It's a social business in Vienna, and they have a special concept with their rooms and so on. And what also makes them special is that the owner, Magda, she only hires, not only, but specifically hires refugees and trains them. And through that, they gain good quality education, a dual apprenticeship model in Austria, and they work, for example, in the kitchen or in the service, and then the intention is that they, after their traineeship, they move to other hotels, and so they're educated for the labor market. And I find that to be a very good example of how to combine making profit in a traditional way and also doing something good for society.
Maybe just briefly, Dominika, if I may, before we move on, the interesting thing with Magda's Hotel is also that it's actually run by Caritas in Vienna. So it really is sort of a big player in the field. And you see that they are also sort of, moving towards maybe having these more agile organizations. So I think it's a very good example of, a big established nonprofit organization doing something that's quite innovative.
Yeah, and I think all the furniture, I stayed one time at Magda's when I visited Vienna, and the furniture that they have, I think, is reused completely and rebuilt from older furniture, right? So you find quite interesting own constructions, which make it also very unique, right? So it's also a unique experience.
That's also very nice. True. Every room is different in this hotel. So they have no room which exists twice in terms of furniture.
And I think the background is that they just didn't have much money when setting up the hotel. So they were dependent on donations from schools and other organizations, but really were able to use this disadvantage and to develop something like an advantage from it, because it's really characteristic, I would say. I think I saw one more hand, Daniela, but you put it down again. So is it just, did you already?
Yeah, no.
Did you want to add something?
It was just on the reinvestment side, going back at it. That's why I put it down again, because you kind of like went through that. But I think one part of the social business, there's this definition that maybe it's 50%. Like there's this percentage that you have to reinvest in your company so that it's called a social business. I'm not sure how much it was, but yeah, I think that's also interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to perhaps go a little back to the slides and try to summarize what we have been just talking about. Here, I think. Very basically, what I think is important to emphasize is that the idea of social enterprises or social entrepreneurship is still a quite fuzzy concept. So there is no very clear-cut definition of what exactly are social enterprises. And I think this makes it oftentimes difficult to really say, okay, what characterizes these types of organizations, right? So the examples that we have now discussed are quite diverse already. But some authors, of course, have tried to identify certain characteristics that can be found in many types or in many social enterprises. But the aspect that you just named, Daniela, I think the idea of reinvestment, there are some definitions in particular from Yunus, no, I've now forgot the name. I will come back to him in a second, who argues that a social enterprise really has to reinvest most parts of their profits, while others are more open and argue that investors can also get some of their money back or more of their money back, and reinvestment is only needed to a certain degree. But I think what the organizations that can be described as social enterprises surely share is, and this is a very basic characteristic, right, that they offer some sort of products or services. So they do have an instrumental value. They do offer services that are valued by some customers. Oftentimes they thereby enlarge the customer base, make services and products accessible to a larger number and diversity of people. But, and this is what all of you, I think, have emphasized, they also have a normative aspect. So they do not only want to provide products and services, but with the product and services that they provide, want to create an improved social outcome, want to contribute to common good, or want to even stimulate social change and transformation. So even go beyond what they as an organization can do, but also have ambitions on a broader societal level. And linking it to our discussions of the last weeks, they oftentimes or typically have an innovative character. So they combine resources in new ways. They change practices that have been established in industries for a long time. So and with this, they can provide new products, new services, or perhaps established products and existing services to a new customer base. So this innovative character is something that is quite typical as well. And last, and this is what we have already talked about as well, is the idea that they have some degree of hybridization. So they combine elements that are typically associated with for-profit, with business organizations, with business firms on the one hand, and charity organizations, charity firms on the other hand. I just hear that there are some, seem to be more questions or comments, I think, in the chat. Is that right?
No, that's fine. Those are just people coming in and out.
Okay, so you will let me know
I'll
if
have an eye on
there's...
that. Yeah.
Okay, let's do that like this. Okay, and I wanted to present you in a little bit more detail one example that that surely is quite well known, the Grameen case, which is one of the social enterprises of the last decades that has become very large in terms of both the activities that they do and also the impact that they have. And I think this could be inspiring case to finding also ideas for the cases that you can work on. Although, of course, having such a huge impact as Grameen, we do not expect from your cases. But what happened in this case was that a woman from a village in Bangladesh approached Muhammad Yunus, who was a professor at that time, and described the situation of modern slavery in which she and many other people in that village and in other villages were trapped. So she wanted to produce stools from bamboo, and in order to buy the bamboo, she had to rely on private moneylenders. And they gave her money, but only on the condition that she would sell all her produce, all the stools that she produces, to them for a predefined price, which is, of course, very low. And by this means, she was not really able, and the people who were in the same situation were not able to escape and to improve their situation. And the cause for this problem was actually that the poorest did not have any access to other financial resources, so they couldn't go to a normal bank and ask for a credit. And this was mainly because because of the practices that were established in the banking system. So, for instance, if you want to have a credit, you need to collateral, right? You need to give some, show that you are a reliable person because you own something or you have some safety, some security net. This was something that, of course, the poorest people do not have. Many of them also were illiterate, so they were not even able to fill out the paperwork. So because of the existing banking system, this problem could occur, and Yunus then tried to really change the banking system, talk to different banks and to change their practices, but they were very reluctant and said that it was not possible. It was just beyond their thinking. So he decided to create an own bank, Grameen Bank, a banking for the poor, and address the root causes by changing the basic principles how a bank works. So if they focus, or the bank focused on very small loans for poor clients, so they were not interested in providing big loans to perhaps larger clients where they could have higher interest rates. So they provided loans, but small loans and at relatively low interest rates. What is really interesting is that they developed new mechanisms to safeguard these loans. So they no longer relied on collateral, but rather on social mechanisms. So in each in villages, they built groups of 5 persons who wanted to have access to a credit, and only after the first 2 started repaying the bank, the other 3 received the money, so received the credit. And so it was social pressure, but also community building ideas that really were used as mechanisms to safeguard loans. And last, they also have a reverse distribution model. So usually when you want to have a credit, you want to get some money from the bank, you have to go to the bank and ask them. But many of the poorest in the population would not have the idea, it would not come to their mind that they can go to a bank and apply for a credit. So what the bank was doing was to send out their employees to small villages to identify potential customers and to approach them. And with this model where they really challenged conventional wisdom on how banking is done, they were really able to provide access to financial resources to a large number of people and to really enhance the situation of the poorest over time. And to give you some idea of how successful in different terms this model is, Grameen, I think, has a repayment rate of almost 100%. So almost everybody really pays their credits back. It now gives loans to 7.5 million poor people, most of which are women. And for them, the situation has improved strongly, as they are now also able to have their own businesses. Almost 70% of families of bank borrowers of Grameen have actually crossed the poverty line. So they were able to achieve their goal to help people pull themselves out of poverty in many cases. And also, as I said, the social status of women has improved. Grameen was thereby really growing over the last years, as this chart indicates. And interestingly, they were also profitable in most years. So the idea of Grameen Bank is not to do any donations, but they really want their money back. It's really lending money to people, but in a way that obviously works. Grameen then started cooperation with a lot of other established firms. They address explicitly multinational companies and large companies with which they want to develop business models together to really grow their impact. And they were surely also important in contributing to a larger movement of microfinance. They did not start it. I think, Georgie, you have some more details on their role, but they were surely important players in promoting and spurring this development. Okay, I wanted to ask now the second question, if you know any other examples, but you already we already talked about this a little bit, but perhaps let us think a little bit about how do these social enterprises create impact? So the examples that you named, what is their particular strength and model? Could you elaborate on the examples or use different ones, of course?
So as you're thinking, what we're aiming at is basically trying to find out or make you reflect a little bit on how are those social enterprises that you mentioned creating the impact, right? So what is sort of their impact model? Because later on we're also going to talk about, how that relates to their business model. And I just wanted to share a little bit of reflection before we go into that on the Grameen case, which although it was successful almost on sort of all accounts, so to say, it also was meeting some kind of criticism by people also in development work by saying they charge lower interest than loan sharks, for instance. But the interest rate that Grameen Bank is charging customers is still quite substantial. So they often have something like 18, 19, 20%, which is, horrendous from our perspective, right? But what is the relation that you can sort of compare this against? And then I was already pasting in a link that gives you some information on what kind of collaborative partnerships Yunus and Grameen were entering. And there was, like, almost 5 or 10 years ago, there was this really sort of vibrant discourse around Grameen, and they were announcing loads of sort of partnerships with Adidas, with Danone, and others. And there's also an interesting reading that Dominika put in on the alliance between Grameen and Danone, which is very interesting in terms of how you think about innovation, also relating to these ideas of Deborah in relation to frugal innovation. And at the same time, often you haven't heard much since on these partnerships, right? So they also had their struggles and difficulties of actually getting to the impact that they wanted to create. So there's always two sides to the story in a sense. But we by now have Roman, who would want to share a little bit on, what is the impact model exactly? I don't know if you want to relate to Planetly or other examples that were that students mentioned, but please come in.
No, I would actually want to relate to Grameen. And so what they were doing is basically looking for a problem people have in these countries, in lower developed countries, and a problem that conventional or big corporates were not serving yet. This loan giving, for example, and they tried to solve this problem by providing this service for these people, and by this they can still make money. So they were basically looking for a market gap that conventional companies or like big corporations were not serving yet.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really great point. Maybe someone else would want to come in on, the examples that they were giving in terms of what their impact model is. I just wanted to share something in relation to what you were saying around they were addressing a certain social challenge, right? So that's also sort of the mindset that you should have as a priority in your course projects. And the interesting bit here, and that connects to our discussion on innovation, is that this is really recombinant innovation, right? So this is not an invention. Sort of Yunus didn't make an invention. Microcredit was there like decades ago. So ideas of microcredit were around much before Grameen was founded and much before Yunus, entered the scene. But I think Grameen had some very interesting bits and pieces that they put together, right? Dominika mentioned this community aspect, the group lending. It mentioned this focus on women as the primary lenders. I think you also mentioned it, but I'm not entirely sure. Maybe I've missed it. One of the ideas was also that people wouldn't come to the bank to pay their interest, but people would be going into remote places, which would otherwise, just prohibit people from paying the loans back, right? So traveling to Dhaka, which is the capital city in Bangladesh, sometimes takes almost a day for people in remote areas, maybe even 2 days. In order to do that, which was super prohibitive in the previous system. And what Grameen did is that they were sending out those sort of loan collectors to those remote villages. So it was really a package of things that were combined in a very innovative way that made this, a major contribution to addressing a problem. But maybe someone else would like to come in on, I don't know what the impact model of Social B is. We had Planetly, we had Magdas, we had Ecosia. Simon.
Yeah, so for Magdas, I think it's pretty clear. It's first of all fostering social mobility for the beneficiaries, and also on the other hand is providing educated workforce for the society in general.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like this is, I would say, the essence.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting there as well is also that it's a combination of things, right? So you're doing that kind of work. You're also trying to sensitize. I mean, never forget sort of the other side of the coin in a sense, right? So people, by staying there, are being made aware. Well, this is an alternative way of running business. Mm-hmm. You're encountering people who sort of have a refugee background or have a disability. You also see and recognize that a traditional nonprofit organization can run in a very different way. We have the recycling aspect. Actually, the first Magdas that they established was also a previous care home, I think. So they transformed a care home into a hotel, which is also a nice idea in terms of repurposing buildings and so on. So it's, again, an interesting combination of things that come together there.
Yeah, and I think this is you touched upon one point that we should also think about, or you, when you design ideas for your projects. The questions are oftentimes is, are beneficiaries of these organizations the same as the customers? And this is not necessarily the case. I mean, in the case of Grameen, though the customers are, of course, those that profit most from the model. But in the case of Magdas, there can be a discrepancy, right? So customer can be everyone, and the employees, people with certain disabilities who have been unemployed for a long time, are the ones who profit the most. And while on the one hand, it can be argued that models such as Grameen are more efficient in really addressing social issues, as Georgie outlined. I think when you have models where customers are not necessarily beneficiaries, you have this visibility, this distribution, this diffusion of ideas aspect perhaps more strongly, because you can reach many more people and ideally introduce some change of mind and behavioral changes, or that might be more permanent. Selina?
now.
Yeah, so I didn't have the original comment, but as I saw that Ecosia was also mentioned, I just wanted to briefly talk about their business model, because I think it fits very well with your comment, because Ecosia has, I think, has different customers and an impact group, because I mean, their impact is by planting. First, maybe the business model, I think, is essentially the same as Google, but they want to be clean, the clean version of Google. So they basically invest a large part of their profit in planting trees, and that's also how they like market and promote themselves. And then I think, I mean, the indirect impact of planting the trees is for the whole world. So it would also impact the customers, but in the short term it does not. So the customers don't have an immediate impact, but they rather do it, I think, because they want to be aligned with the environment and want to benefit the environment, but they don't see the impact directly on themselves.
Yeah, I think if you had a choice to purchase the same product or to use the same type of service, and one of them is more sustainable than the other, I think it would be most natural to most people to use the one that is more sustainable. The question, or I think that the challenge for many social enterprises, is to really create products and services that can compete with existing offerings, right? I think this is what is the challenge for every entrepreneur, and I think in particular in this context of social enterprises, this is something that is not easy to achieve because they have different goals that they have to put more emphasis on. Oftentimes have higher cost structures because they employ people or pay people better, or pay their suppliers better. So it's really not so easy for in particular social enterprises that emphasize social values to compete with other types of companies. Other comments or ideas? Okay, this does not seem to be the case. So let's get back a little bit to our slides. No, actually, I wanted to show you the video now. Instead of me talking, I would let Georgie talk now for a little while. We were talking already about the duality of social enterprises, right? On the one hand, they address or have to address economic values in order to ideally become sustainable over time and not need other types of support. And on the other hand, they want to focus on social and ecological values. And Georgie, when developing the Air MOOC, which was the basis for this course, or the idea for this course, prepared a great summary of what this duality means and what types of organizations result from this. And I would like to share it with you. Georgie, you let me know when the video quality is not good, right? But I hope it will work.
I will. We don't hear anything yet, Dominika.
Oh, this is not good. Is it better?
No, it doesn't seem to change.
Okay. I made it at max.
Better you send the video link and everyone watch it by himself, maybe?
Okay, so you have the link in the chat.
Oh, now we have it twice. It takes 5 minutes. So see you here at 4:17. Or you can stay here and just mute yourself.
I think everyone should be done by now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. By the way, I think I found the option of how you can share the sound. You're supposed to be clicking here once again in Teams, whereas in Zoom it automatically works. Let me try
okay.
with the video.
Okay, we'll try that next time. Yeah. Yeah, I think what the video shows greatly is the whole spectrum of possible potential social enterprises, right? And it surely describes or focuses on ideal types still. So there are still more fine-grained combinations. But I think thinking about, is it an impact-only model that would interest you as a project, or is it somewhere more on the right part of the spectrum? I think this can help you also to think about another aspect of the business model that you are supposed to develop, namely how can you finance the organization, or how can you finance the activities that you are planning, which is surely an important part. So this is a video that you can surely watch again. And what I would like to put some emphasis on in the next couple of minutes is to introduce you to some first, let's say, tools to really develop an impact model and a business model for your project. And very basically speaking about business models, not in the context of social business models or impact-oriented business models, they are often described by using three elements. So first, a business model includes a value proposition, right? So who are your customers? Who is your target groups? And what do you offer to them that they actually value? So it's not only naming the products and the services that you offer, but really referring to what is the value that you create for the customers or for the beneficiaries. A value constellation describes how do you exactly deliver this value and this offers to your customers. What are your value chain activities? What is the network of suppliers and partners? What are the distribution channels? To really thinking through what are all the activities and aspects and resources that you need to create that value that you propose. And the last part is typically how do you capture value, right? So how do you create income through your value proposition? How do you cover your costs? And ideally, at least in for-profit organizations, how do you also capture and some of the value to generate profits? And when looking at social businesses or impact-oriented organizations, not much has to change. So you can apply the existing idea of key characteristics of a business model, at least to a large extent. So we already, of course, there have to be or should be some adaptations or some additional thoughts that you take into account. So first, when you think of value proposition, it's not necessarily only customers, but it can be beneficiaries that you have to think about and to think about what is the value that you add to them. This can be the same group of people, but this can be also different groups of people. With regard to the value constellation, you don't really, at least when you think of the definition or description of the major characteristics, you do not really have to make any changes. You really have to go through the entire thinking of the value chain, how to produce or deliver the service that and the product that you want to offer. And with regard to value capture, this is surely the most discussed aspect or part of a business model in the context of social enterprises. Many, for instance, Yunus and others argue that you have to think of, and what we have seen now also in the video, that they are a social profit equation. You want to make social profit or have a social impact, and you still have also an economic. Sure. Is there a question?
I think that wasn't on purpose.
Okay. And an economic profit equation. So how do you, on the one hand, generate income and cover your costs? And what is exactly really identifying and defining also what is the social profit and what is the planned economic profit, and how are the two related? And how do you in cases because cases of conflict can always occur, and it's not easy to really emphasize both at the same time because they can come into conflict. How do you really decide in these situations? And we have put together here some examples of other social enterprises where we went through these criteria or these characteristics. So one example is AFB. It's a social and green IT firm in Germany, and I think it's it describes itself as the European largest common good oriented IT company in Europe. So the major goal, the social goal of or the social value proposition is to create work for people with disabilities. AFB, the name stands for Arbeit für Menschen mit Behinderung, work for people with disabilities. So it's really in the name of the company, the major goal that they want to promote. At the same time, they want to enhance resource efficiency of IT products. So they provide high quality refurbishment services and reuse old or existing equipment that they buy mainly from other companies. So the value constellation, or important aspects of the value constellation, I don't go through everything, but that they really change recruitment standards. So they purposefully select people with disabilities, with a certain background, and this, which is not a standard recruiting technique, right? And they focus on the market for used products, which is also rather uncommon, in particular in the IT area or in the IT market, where renewing and product life cycles have become shorter and shorter. How do they capture value? What is the social value that they focus on? Again, it's the percentage of people with disabilities that they employ, and also the increase of product life cycles, creating and improving resource efficiency, and also reducing the footprint, the CO2 footprint for their customers, right? The revenue model is quite a standard model, so the customers pay for the products and services that they offer. Regarding venture type, it is to some extent a trade-off model between business and impact. When the company grows its activities, there is really the question whether with the recruiting standards and the employment standards they can fulfill these functions, but at least to a large extent, to some extent, these goals, business and social impact, are in line. And customers are not direct beneficiaries. Customers, of course, profit from having more resource efficient, more sustainable products, but it is really mainly the employees that profit from the organization here. Other examples I will just go through quickly, because there are other topics we want to talk about. What I want to emphasize shortly is and that and also the video with the spectrum has shown that it is not only the rather the business-like organizations with more social goals that we want to think about. So in particular, when you develop ideas for your projects, you can also think on impact-only models, right? Which have also been named. So Prinzessinnengärten, for instance, urban gardens, can also be described as social enterprises with an impact-only model, where they really focus on creating social cohesion in the neighborhood or educating the children and citizens in the neighborhood on sustainable food. So these kind of ideas also are within the scope of this course. Or another example would be Train of Hope, an organization that also addressed and helped refugees during the 2015 crisis. They were situated in Vienna and were able to very, very quickly develop support structures that included taking care of housing, also providing medical support, food, consulting services, and different other services, with some support from local authorities, but mainly really financing themselves through donations and with a volunteers-only model. So they still, up until now, have no employees, but work with volunteers only. Another tool that we will discuss next week in a little bit more detail and a little bit more complex model is this business model canvas. So starting off with the idea of what is my value or our value proposition, our value constellation, and then our value capture or idea for value capture, you can go through a business model canvas and really define in more detail what are the key activities of your organizations, what are the key resources business, what are the key who are the key partners, what are the channels that you want to use to distribute the product and services. So value proposition covers the value proposition, and all these key partners, key activities, key resources relate to what was meant by value constellation. And the impact and value capture is also defined in more detail here using the cost and revenue structure. We will upload a paper from Burkett, which is, I think, a nice and very easy to read paper or report from Grameen, I think, where they also present business and impact models using this business model canvas for different types of ventures. So it's probably as preparation for next week, surely very helpful, and we will upload it, I think, today or tomorrow. So we would highly recommend to go through in preparation of your group work. And the last, I think, interesting link, the tool that we actually want to use next week is the social business model canvas. So it is related or based on this basic business model canvas, but adds some more dimensions that are particular to social businesses, or that will allow you to draw a broader and a more detailed picture of the organization and the project that you are having. So we will provide you the link as well, so you can have a look already to get a little bit familiarize yourself with this tool in a way that you can start working with it next week.
Before, Dominika, in relation to the social business model canvas, I think one of the main messages here is basically that you already see that it's much more complex and much broader in scope, right? So you saw that there were more kinds of sort of building blocks that you needed to think about, and that also things that you don't really see in the classical business model canvas, such as the social value proposition, are there. And the interesting thing here is that a colleague, I think from Scotland, but I'm not entirely sure, maybe it fits nicely, my cup. She was working on, developing the social business model canvas, and there's also a mural template for it, which you can use and which we're going to, test out a little bit in the working session, whereby the idea, again, picking up what Daniela was saying earlier, is not to, do some kind of exercise and then document it or put it in the assignment. It's really there to help you understand, what kinds of elements would you need to think about in relation to your course projects, and what are important elements in sort of developing something that is really effective in addressing a certain sustainability challenge. Back over to you, Dominika.
Okay.
Like a reporter, back over to you.
I just take 2-3 more minutes. There is one more point I would like to emphasize or put focus on very shortly. I will not go into detail very much, but perhaps we can talk about it next week at the beginning. Before I hand over to you, I didn't forget, Georgie, that you still have some interesting points that you want to make. But very shortly, the sharing didn't work yet. Now I hope. Yeah. Very shortly, what I wanted to introduce is a concept that I found valuable to think of. And this is the concept of the organizational form. I'm not sure if you have already heard about it, but it is very basically, in an abstract form, I'm aware of that, described as a set of features that characterize organization of that form, or that organizations of that form have in common. So it typically includes aspects of the business model and processes, but also elements of organizational structure and the overall goals and governance models of organizations. And some examples would be, for instance, a car manufacturer, right? So the factories of car manufacturers probably look quite similar, and we have quite a good understanding of what car manufacturers do. They have also similar organizational structures to a large extent. They have similar goals, producing cars and selling cars and so on, promoting new technologies perhaps. So it is an organizational form where we as consumers, as outside evaluators, have quite a clear idea of what they are doing. Another example would be traditional banks. So they provide loans on the one hand, or you can give them your savings and get some interest from that, and we have quite a good understanding of what these organizations are doing. So although there's a large number of firms that can be described as car manufacturers or banks, we have a quite good understanding, and this is important in terms of legitimacy for these types of organizations. So for organizations that cannot be described as being part of a clear form, as belonging to one organizational form, and research has shown this quite nicely, they typically suffer from lower legitimacy, and lower legitimacy oftentimes leads to lower rates of survival. So when you are an illegitimate organization, the risk that you really go bankrupt is higher, even though it does not necessarily have something to do with the business model that you are having. So legitimacy and being recognized is quite important. And in the context of social enterprises, this is not so easy because, as we have discussed today, there are so many different business models with different structures, with different types of financing, that it's really difficult to say, okay, what really characterizes a social enterprise that makes it recognizable as member of this organizational form. And one solution a little bit to this problem that is oftentimes suggested, or that is at least discussed, that do social enterprises need a dedicated legal form? So at least this would be a signal, oh, this is one certain type of organization. It has social goals, and this is why perhaps I want to buy from this organization or work for this organization or have something to do with this organization. This could contribute to the legitimacy of social enterprises. And in most cases, in most countries, social enterprises do not have a dedicated legal form. So what, for instance, many social enterprises in Germany do is that they build up double structure. So they have, on the one hand, a limited liability company, for instance, or any other type of for-profit oriented legal form. And they also found a foundation. And then they have to deal with these two entities in order to, on the one hand, provide the product and services and do their commercial part of their business, and do also contribute to social good. And this is not such this is a rather inefficient solution. And the reason is that in most countries, legal forms are focused rather on either addressing commercial needs and commercial aspects, or needs of non-profit organizations, of charity organizations. So this hybrid nature of social enterprises is not yet reflected in the legal system in most countries. So this is, I think, something that you could also think about when creating your projects. And there is there are movements across the world. In Germany, it is the purpose economy movement. And we have heard earlier that ECOSIA is a purpose organization, so belongs to this movement, where the idea is to create something like a steward ownership. So the founders create an organization and own the organization, but in the end, they are not supposed, or not, it's not possible for them to sell the organization to someone else because of the purpose that is bound, because the organization is bound to a certain purpose. Alternatively to creating, and this movement actually makes strong calls for a dedicated legal form to also make this happen, because at the moment organizations that want to have or be part of this purpose economy are also struggling with finding appropriate legal forms that make it possible. Many of them create foundations, but this is not the ideal solution. An alternative way to making social enterprises more recognizable as such is certification projects, right? So, for instance, we have this certified B Corp, certified benefit corporations that can participate in this certification project. They have to add to add some additional transparency and aspects, and they have to report on certain things, but also have certain goals that they commit to. But it is, of course, less strict than adopting a certain legal form. But at the same time, and I think thinking about what could be the right way or which is easier, on the one hand, a dedicated legal form surely increases the legitimacy. So you would have a legal recognition as a type of organizational form. This could really help to get support from other types of organizations, or to also develop a support structure such as legal support or tax support. On the other hand, certificates and organizational practices might be more easier to diffuse, right? I mean, legal forms are always bound to a certain country, so whenever you think of organizations from different countries, it would be difficult to compare again. So both types surely have advantage, and I think that these are interesting developments that take place in parallel at the moment, and that surely put some more emphasis on impact orientation in general. And it is, I think, interesting developments that are worth to follow in the course of time over the next years. Are there any questions or direct comments on that? If not, I would hand over to you, Georgie, to discuss.
Maybe a short question. What is meant by licensing? Which organization provides these licenses?
There is a standard standard providing organization. This I have to look up the name actually.
It's called B-Lab.
B-Lab, yeah, thanks. And this B-Lab, thereby you have to apply to get this certificate, right? And there are certain how do you call it, reporting standards that you have to commit to, and certain information that you have to provide. And once you are evaluated positively, then you are allowed to use also this B Corp logo on your website and so on, and to describe yourself as a certified B Corporation.
And so they are social
and you have to pay for this, right? Yes, they describe themselves as a social enterprise on a meta level, so to speak. So they mainly focus on really promoting the idea of social enterprises, spreading these models. And you have to pay also to be certified on a regular basis, because, of course, the B Lab has to cover its costs in some way as well.
All right, thank you. Interesting.
Right. I think what Dominika mentioned in relation to these certifications will also be quite interesting in what we're going to talk about on impact and impact measurement. Mikolai and I will be covering that. So there's an interesting sort of parallel, but also difference in terms of what the certification process does and what a proper sort of assessment of impacts would actually do. Right. If there are no direct questions now, or we can also take them later, just being mindful of the time, I still at least wanted to sort of zoom out a little bit of the individual organizations to focus on what I refer to as integrative strategy. I'm going to try and share a video later. I was just trying to share my sound as well, but now got an error message. I'm not entirely sure whether it's going to work. But I'm going to cut it short today a little bit, focusing on letting a social entrepreneur speak to you later on. And then maybe we are going to carry this model of integrative strategy into the next session as a start to the working groups, instead of rushing it too much today, right? So I would want to give enough time for discussion as well. And if something comes up in relation to what Dominika was talking about, we can also tackle it then, right? So what I wanted to do is basically, or what we've done up until now, is look at different kinds of organizations, rather from their individual perspective. What we've looked at is their impact models, their business models, organizational forms, and also this idea of, sometimes it's tricky in terms of legal structure, so the way you basically organize your venture because you don't fit anywhere. The second point that we want to make, or the second very important perspective in relation to strategy, is integrative strategy, in the sense of how does this relate to the wider system? How does this relate to partnerships and so on? So just a very brief sort of historical contextualization. So in the 1990s, there was this huge focus on sustained competitive advantage by people like Michael Porter at Harvard, who still is a strategy guru. And the focus there was really, you come up with something that is called sustained or sustainable, but the sustainable is really, you need to differentiate yourself from the competition. You need to come up with something that is super hard to imitate. So you need to sort of push back all competitors in order to, have high profit margins and so on. Around 2013, there was a really nice book by Rita Gunther McGrath, who's at Columbia, on the end of competitive advantage, where she was like pushing this idea of, the world today is just too fast paced. There are so many things going on, digitization, but also sort of turmoil that just, picked up over the last years, that there is nothing that you can, create and then sustain for a longer period of time, but you need to be really agile and sort of innovate in a way on a continuous basis, right? And now, and I think that was also pushed by the COVID pandemic, there's an interesting article, which I didn't link here, but which you could look up, where I got this quote from the golden age of collaboration, right? Where they were talking about how some former competitors in the biotech industry were getting together in Silicon Valley in order to address these challenges. And what you see here is also a snapshot of a blog post that I wrote. We also have it already. I think Tina put it already on the platform. And the idea is to come up with something or foster something that is that you could call integrative strategy, right? So it's not idiosyncratic. It doesn't only look at your organization and how you could advance as an organization, but really looks into how you, within a larger collaborative setting, for instance, could be addressing a sustainability challenge, or how also shifting the way you think about the challenge and how you address it makes a difference, right? So I'm going to try, I hope it works. If not, I'm going to retry sharing because actually, I think it should be possible to include the audio, but let's see. I want to give you an example from, I think, a very inspiring social entrepreneur who is in the sustainable food production business. And my point really here, without much commentary, is she's doing things in new ways. And I would want to prompt you to let me know what your key takeaways are, right? So you see the video is very long, 60 minutes. She's a great speaker, so I would encourage you to watch the whole thing. I'm just going to show you like 5 minutes of it around that. And my idea would really be to prompt you, what are your key takeaways? What are interesting sort of mind shifts that she's promoting? And what can we learn in terms of, addressing things in a more integrative way? So I'll try to share now, knowing that I got this error message. If it doesn't work, I'm going to stop sharing and try again. And in the worst of cases, we will share the link again, but let me know if it works.
Hi, thank you very much, Georgie. I love to join you guys in the MOOC today.
Can you hear it?
Yes.
Okay.
I am Alyssa Jade McDonald-Bertel, and I am a third-generation farmer, originally from Papua New Guinea. And 12 years ago, I set up a social enterprise in Germany to be founding my company, Bliss GmbH, where we farm cacao. We do cacao farmer education, and we also advise companies and policymakers in Europe and in developing countries on how they can evolve sustainability in regulation, investment, and business practices. As you just heard from my introduction, it sounds like I do a variety of things. I said chocolate company and farming and advising companies on sustainability and policy. Let me bring it together for you in one simple concept. Years ago, I read a book by Jim Collins. He's a writer. He wrote the book Great by Choice, and he's a writer where he's been studying, he's American, and he's been studying, for example, ways that stock-listed, big, proud, strong American companies have grown from innovation and scaled their innovation. Now, when I was reading Jim Collins' book, I thought, okay, he's talking about scaling innovation. As a social entrepreneur, I'm always interested in scaling impact. And what I loved is I took his approach to scaling innovation and thought about what it meant about scaling for impact. And he gave this really great analogy. He said, shoot bullets and then shoot a cannonball. And what he meant by that was come up with bullets, come up with lots of little ideas, some experiments, practices, build a business with lots of experiments, practices, and little bullets. And you practice shooting your little bullets on little targets. And once you find the one bullet for the one target that really makes sense, then you get out your cannonball and you fire the one big missile, like the one big hit that's going to make the impact. And while Mr. Collins meant it in the concept of innovation, I think it really applies to us in social enterprise and in scaling impact. I have 3 examples of how I have practiced shooting bullets and then got out my cannon gun and committed to the big cannonball. These are the 3 examples. Firstly, when I started my company, it was 2009, I set up my first farms in Ecuador, together with my father, who is a farmer from Papua New Guinea. And we set up farms and I started farming cacao and then making chocolate. Bean to bar chocolate as we know it now. It was still pretty innovative back in 2009 and certainly a big step for a small social enterprise startup. Now, when I was doing that, we were doing everything. We were farming the cacao organically and directly traded with our farmers. We brought it to market and I sold it here in Germany and especially around Europe in luxury locations, in luxury hotels paired with fancy whiskies. And it was going quite well. It was a luxury chocolate in the end, although we were doing it organic and fair trade in the back end. And so we were able to sell at a very high price and the company did well. And then I had to keep growing. So how do you grow? Well, typically in cacao and in commodities, if you want to grow your company, you take more land and you grow your farm size so you can farm more beans and sell more chocolate. But it wasn't inspiring to me because that's not what I thought a social enterprise in my generation does. It was certainly more the thinking of my father and grandfather who came from old-fashioned, let's say, commodity farming approaches where if you want to grow as a company, you grow your land size. What I realized during the time of working with farmers in cacao and seeing them grow was actually farming and farmer education was a more interesting place for me to spend my effort, attention, and care in this whole market than actually producing chocolate bars and selling them in Europe. This is my little bullets to big cannonball example number 1. I realized that there's not many participants in cacao farmer training. On one side, there's not much competition. On the other side, the impact I could achieve with cacao farmer training and helping farmers understand plant pathology, how to increase their yield, how to diversify their income, how to work on the land in a natural way that's good for them and their families, and how to take care of their health. Well, that was achieving the impact I really wanted as a social entrepreneur. And it didn't involve having to sell things at a high price in Europe. It was more in line with what I wanted to do. And I could scale the impact I was looking for, as in helping farmers. And I didn't have to grow an old-fashioned way by growing land. This is my first example of how I went from shooting little bullets to identifying my cannonball. So today, what's my business? We're in the business of cacao farmer training. We train farmers all around the world in cacao farming for their own improved livelihoods, for their well-being in agroecology, to improve their productivity and yield per hectare, and also to take care of their health and be able to bring strong families into the future. That's my cannonball.
Okay, I'll stop it here. As I said, I think you already perceive that she's a very engaging speaker and she has two further examples which are really great. What I wanted to spend the time that we still have left on, instead of then going into some sort of a conceptual model that we build based on those experiences, is just to give you a bit of room for discussion, right? So I would like to hear from you what kind of mind shifts you were seeing, what kind of unusual strategies, maybe some kind of innovative thinking in relation to scaling the impact Alyssa was was sort of applying in her specific case of sustainable food production. So take a few instances of thinking about that, and I'd really like to get into a bit of a discussion around what you saw, what you heard, what kind of interesting shifts she had in terms of their strategy, and what types of, as she was saying, cannonballs, or as we were then conceptualizing in the model, that we can then dive into next time as sort of impact levers. What kind of things did you hear in relation to her sort of maximizing her impact? Yeah, Zlatica, please.
Yes, thank you. When I was actually watching this video yesterday, so I'm a little bit, I was thinking about it. And in my opinion, I really liked how she did it. And first, I would say that it is so important to kind of see that something is maybe not working in the future, that you kind of need to have this vision that maybe what people are doing till now, it is not the best what we'll be doing now, even for the future. And what kind of an impact you can have in the future, and also like if you really like it in that way. I also like that you have to try. It is like really trial and failure. So it means that you are gaining like a lot of experiences, and you kind of know what is not working for you, maybe what is better working for you. And yeah, I guess that this big bullet that she was, or cannonball that she was saying, is something that you are finding yourself personally like very meaningful, and what is kind of driving the whole company totally forward, or somewhere where you think that it might be in, I don't know, 10 years, let's say.
Yeah, thanks very much. So you were sort of outlining that the vision was important, also the experimentation was important, and also this kind of, what drives you, what kind of wrongs or ills do you see in the system, and how would you want to address those? Fantastic. Mara, if you would like to come in, please do.
Yeah, I also found it interesting how she explained how she went outside the beaten path. Like she said that the generation of her father or her grandfather would have done business differently, that they would have done it all by themselves, that they would have just grown their business themselves to produce more chocolate to sell in Europe. But she actually went outside this box and trying to empower people like the other cocoa farmers to do their business more efficiently, to grow more cocoa in a more natural way maybe. And this aspect of not wanting to do it all by yourself, but also turning to the other people and giving them the tools to do business in a better way. This was something that I found very interesting.
Fantastic. Philip, I'll hand it over to you in a second. I just wanted to mention that's exactly one of the key elements in terms of integrative strategy, right? So the kind of argument that I'm promoting is, you really need to zoom out in terms of, you have the sustainability challenge, and you saw that she was really motivated by impact and by addressing social issues and well, basically ecological issues as well. And the point here was really that she was thinking, or she started to think, outside her own little perspective, right? So she was thinking, how can I scale? Well, by educating others. And you're also going to see, if you continue watching the video, and as I said, we're going to pick up on that, there were other very unconventional ways of how she was pushing for more impact, for instance, by collaborating with big chocolate business, by also working with policymakers in order to change standards and so on. Philip, I think you raised your hand, please.
Yes, just to add on that. So basically for me, I think it showed pretty well that you should never take the situation as given. So that whenever you're confronted with the situation, you don't have to do it like everyone else does it, but rather think about how you could possibly like reinvent that. I think that was interesting.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that actually reminds me, which is a nice close of the loop. So, and I think we're going to stop it here, and as I said, pick up on this in the next session. I think Dominika, you wanted to share some details still in terms of having some instructions on how we're going to proceed. But I think what's very important also in terms of your course projects, and that's why I keep pushing you in that direction. Be daring, right? Do stuff and try out stuff. And I mean, don't think that we're only looking for, you doing the right thing. There's no right thing in sort of developing an innovation. And what I meant in sort of this closes the loop to the last working session is that you were, one group was talking about sort of utopias and how realistic does this have to be? Well, obviously you shouldn't, come up with something that is totally unworkable. And on the other hand, we also encourage you to push for, new approaches, innovations, unconventional kinds of thinking. So please embrace those. So thanks very much, everyone. Again, I mean, your group is, just much more interactive than we always plan for in preparing the session. So we always run into time troubles. But again, I think we can carry this over into the working session. And I'll hand back over to Dominika for a couple of logistic issues. And then we're going to see each other next week.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add. We already talked in the beginning that we will, because there were some questions coming in, what about the assignment? So we will provide you some details until next week. How exactly, or not how exactly, but to give you some more details on the structure and expected content. And I think this idea of challenging conventional wisdom and established practices, we saw that in all examples, and closing with that, I think is just a good thing, right? So we meet next week. We will provide you, but we can send an email and ask you to really read some of the papers on which we based our today's discussions. I think this will help you to perhaps prepare some more detailed questions to really understand the concepts, and if not, to question them so we can talk about them in more detail next week. But this we can do by email. Yeah, and it would be great if you had and it's surely valuable for you if you watched the videos in the AirMOOC on strategy in particular, where we have different examples, yeah, right, to give you also some inspiration for your project and how you could think about developing your own projects. There is one more question, or did you forget, Zlatica, to put your hand down? I'm not sure.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, that was from before. Okay, so thank you for a great session, and see you next week.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.